morning. I just couldn't resist. Sitting there, I didn't plan to do this, but I'm sitting there and thinking, oh man, there's so much cool about the fall of Babylon to the Persians and everything. Because we talked this morning about the date, October 12, 539 BC, and pretty certain on that as far as Daniel 5 goes. But a lot of interesting things were happening. Belshazzar's father, Nabonidus, the absent king, who's off doing archaeological expeditions and rebuilding temples of Sin or the moon god, and that was going on. And the Medes and the Persians are gaining strength off to the east. And the Medes and Persians are the same people. It's kind of like two different dynasties, but they're all, we think of modern-day Iran, different families vying for power within that structure. But so you've got this growing kingdom to the east, the Persians, and it was kind of a change in management because eventually when Cyrus the Great overtakes Babylon, he actually restores the worship of Marduk to center stage, becomes very popular with people in the capital city. He was really good at making friends, Cyrus the Great. In fact, as you read Ezra and Nehemiah, he's the one that, allows, in fact, we found, he allows the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple and allowed exiles to return home and was very, very well regarded by his subjects, even those that were technically in captivity. And we found, not only is that record in the Bible, but we found cuneiforms about his religious reforms and the freedoms that he allowed and everything. But the capture of Babylon is super interesting because you got this magnificent walled city, powerful city, well-defended city, but several things happened that led to the capture, and one of them was, and I can't remember the guy's name. I was actually trying to look it up there real quick, but this guy, name starts with a G, but he was one of the governors around Babylon, just high-ranking Babylonian official. He actually switched sides right before Babylon fell, so he was feeding a lot of intel to Cyrus and his military commanders about weaknesses in the city and things like that. And so when the Persians got there, it was incredible because talked about this morning how the Euphrates River was actually channeled to go through the city. I mean, it would have been beautiful and to see and the life and from the water and the access to that and everything. But so the Euphrates goes through. Rivers sometimes flood. So part of the engineering there, they built some sluices before it went into town so that if it reached flood stage, they could divert some of the Euphrates River off there and it wouldn't flood the city. Pretty smart. But the Persians, through this defector, got knowledge of all this engineering. So as their army approaches Babylon, they actually divert some of the Euphrates water off to these sluices, these overflows. And they didn't drain the entire river, but they got it down to where it was probably about chest high. And so where the water passed under the walls into the city, then their army was able to just walk through underneath the walls and invade the city. And the city would have been, Babylon, they say, would have been large enough that people in the palace or people in the middle of the city wouldn't have even known that the Persian army was in there. And so that I think is really interesting. And then part of Cyrus's benevolence, Nabonidus, the king of Babylon, Belshazzar, his co-regent, but Nabonidus got a job. I mean, he was deposed and he was given an administrative job back in Persia. So just interesting, but you think of these different kingdoms there. They really weren't, it wasn't, between the Persians and the Babylonians, it wasn't like the Persians come in and annihilate all the Babylonians. They just kind of changed things up a little bit, kept the administrative system very similar. The religion of the Babylonians was promoted by Cyrus. Anyway, interesting stuff. So let's get on to tonight. 1 Samuel chapter 7. And so we talked about a couple of weeks ago about series of happenings. There were battles, tragedies that occurred in rapid fire succession, chapters 4, 5, and 6, all around this object, this sacred object, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark was hauled from Shiloh. Its permanent location at that time was hauled from Shiloh to the battlefield between Israel and Philistia, because Israel had been defeated in a battle, and they thought, if we can bring our magic charm over, if we can bring this this object that represents the presence of our God close by. Bring it into the battle with us. There's no way the Philistines can defeat us. And that didn't work out. They lost another battle, and worse was the ark was then captured. Now, this is very normal in ancient warfare. If you defeat your enemy, something you would like to do, if possible, is capture their gods and haul their gods to your capital for display. And it was a way of asserting your dominance, showing our gods are stronger than their gods. So in this case, not that the ark was Israel's God, but it was very precious to Israel and connected with God. So they take it and they put it in the temple of Dagon for display to show how strong they are. And remember, another, I don't guess you could call this a sacred object, but something similar happened not that many years before with Samson. Samson was Israel's leader. Samson was uniquely gifted by God with the strength that he had, so he was kind of symbolic of the God of Israel. And when he was captured by the Philistines, right, they gouged his eyes out, and at this great pagan celebration there at the temple of Dagon, they trooped him in and tied him up to show him off. And basically, again, we're going to worship and we're going to show how big our God is by putting your God here on display. And they did that with Samson, and then they did that with the Ark of the Covenant. And neither one of those worked out well for the Philistines. Maybe they learned this time, but don't bring people or sacred objects from Israel into the temple of Dagon. It never works out well. With Samson, of course, he brings the temple down by pulling on these load-bearing columns, and everybody dies, including him. And in this case, the ark shows up, and the statue of their God starts falling over or almost bowing down. They find him on his face all broken in pieces in the morning. And then people started dying. People started getting sick. They started getting skin tumors and dying. And this happened. It coincided with them bringing the ark in their midst. So they move the ark to another city, and they move the ark to another. Everywhere the Philistines put it, people start dying. So they send it on to back into Israel on this cart that was guided by these cows. And then the Israelites, of course, Beth Shemesh, the Israelites, some of the men, 70, couldn't resist the temptation to, open that lid and see, are the stone tablets really in there? Is what's in the ark? And they were not supposed to do that. And those 70 men died. And the question that the men of the town asked after that episode, 1 Samuel 6:20, is this: who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? They're like, wow, God is, it's a fearsome thing to deal with the things of God. And the Israelite army couldn't stand in the presence of this God. When they started treating him lightly and trying to use the ark as a magic charm, they fell in battle. The high priest Eli couldn't stand. When he got news that the ark had been captured and his sons had been killed, he fell off his chair and died. The Philistines couldn't stand before this God. Literally, their god Dagon just kept falling over in front of this God. So who can stand before this God? And of course, Eli's sons couldn't stand either. Hophni and Phinehas died as well in those narratives. And so we talked about, there's one way of thinking about this, what we talked about a couple weeks ago, as being a series of defeats for Israel, defeats for the Philistines. But really it was kind of a series of, if you think about it, on the other hand, it was a series of victories for the holiness of God. God was proving, I cannot be trifled with. You cannot trifle with the ark that represents my presence as well. So tonight, we get into 1 Samuel 7. Samuel is going to come into his own tonight, but we remember that he was blessed even before he came into the world. When, he was a baby that was prayed for, that was sought after, that was dedicated, even before she's pregnant. If you give me this son, I will dedicate this son to your service, Lord. So he's special even before she's pregnant, and then she's praying about this child, and then when he's born, she dedicates him to this life of service to God. And when he is born and he's a baby, she she reaffirms this commitment. And you have this at the end of 1 Samuel chapter 1. Listen to what Hannah says. She says, I prayed for this baby. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. She remembered her pledge to God, and she knew that her baby boy was going to be very special, very important in God's plans. And so as soon as he was old enough, she took him to the tabernacle, and he began working under Eli, the high priest, and with the other folks there, beginning his service to the Lord. This baby grows into a man, and he performs different jobs around the house, and certainly more responsibility as he gets older. And then he begins to hear. At first, he doesn't know who he's hearing from. It's confusing. That's one of the reasons we can trust the biblical account. I mean, this is the way it really would play out. If you heard a voice, you would not immediately think, oh, God's talking to me. You would think, oh, hey, honey, yeah, or Dad, are you calling? I mean, that's what he thought. He thought Eli was calling him. But he is able to then discern, no, this is the voice of God. He begins to receive messages from God, a message of judgment against Eli, a message of judgment against Hophni and Phinehas and the house of Eli, and messages for Israel. And so he's receiving these prophetic words. Israel begins to recognize he has this prophetic gift, this prophetic ministry, and they began to pay attention to what this man Samuel said even before he became the leader of Israel. Over time, they recognize him as a prophet, and they hold him in high esteem. So, when Eli died, when his sons, the priests, died, it was pretty clear to the nation who was going to be their leader. It was going to be Samuel. Now, for 20 years, the ark has still been parked in this remote location. The ark is not where it is supposed to be. The ark is not at the center, at the place where Israel gathers to worship and to sacrifice and to pray to God. It's in a place called Kiriath Jearim at the house of Abinadab. It's not supposed to be there, but they're too afraid to move it. So it's there for 2 decades. They are afraid to move it because every time that ark got moved, people started getting sick. People started dying. So we pick up the story in verse 2 of chapter 7. It was a long time, 20 years in all, that the ark remained at Kiriath Jearim. All the people of Israel mourned and sought after the Lord. Samuel said to the whole house of Israel, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, returning wholeheartedly, then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths, and commit yourselves to the Lord and serve only Him. He will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the Israelites put away their Baals and Ashtoreths and served the Lord only. So Israel was in a state of lament, in a state of mourning. Why? The ark that represents the presence of God with His people is not with them. It's not in Shiloh, and they don't dare bring it to Shiloh, but that's sad to them. Samuel preaches to them. Samuel preaches repentance to them. He calls them to address the underlying sickness of the nation, their idolatry. The fact that they are not giving their whole hearts to God. They're giving some of themselves to God, and they've got some shrines and idols in their homes as well, just to cover all the bases. So they are, in his sermons, they are to return to the Lord with all of their hearts. And that's a powerful phrase, I think. All their hearts. God is not interested in being a part owner of your life, being a part-time God. He's not interested in getting scraps or leftovers or surplus. He's not interested in being an add-on to your life. He wants to be God. He wants to be Lord. He wants all of you. And by rights, He should have all of you. He is your creator. He is the maker of heaven and earth. He's the one who redeemed us from sin by sending his Son to die on the cross for us. He created us. He gave us grace. He's why we're here. So the nation is crying out to him. They're finally wanting to give their whole hearts back to him because they realize now God is not interested in being a secondary God or being one of several gods we worship. So I think there's this theme there that we see a bit of our design, we see a bit of the way we're engineered, that we are engineered to worship God. We are made to live with everything about us orbiting around God. Seek ye first his kingdom. When I was younger, I was fascinated. About every year there'd be a news story or two about a sinkhole. And I thought sinkholes were kind of cool and kind of scary because all of a sudden a road is there and poof, it's gone, and like cars are down in the sinkhole, or a home was there and next thing you know, it's gone. It's swallowed up by a sinkhole. And it's interesting, right? I mean, a house or a building, it can sit on a piece of property for years and years and it's just fine. And then one day it's gone. Boom, it disappeared. It's at the bottom of this giant hole. Anyway, I thought sinkholes were kind of fascinating. And it looked like, the hole appeared from nowhere. But we know it took a long time, years to develop typically, for the foundations to weaken and this space, this vacuous space to develop underneath, and the underground erosion that was happening over time, where finally the foundations give way and the house just sinks. But it turns out, in these situations that the sinkhole was developed. It was there for a long time. And I think about that as I look at a story like this, because I think it points to a couple of realities. Like, somebody can look fine, buttoned up, and looks like they got everything together, everything's figured out, and kind of got it, they're kind of successful or whatever, and they look fine on the outside, but you never know what's going on underneath. And I could insert examples of let's do pastors, disgraced pastors, Ted Haggard or Jimmy Swaggart or this or that. Or you could do politicians, or you name it. People that look like they had it all together. Next thing you know, sinkhole, they're gone. What happened? But it's interesting because I think it reminds us that there can be, whatever the outside appearance is, there can be underneath weaknesses that are developed, erosion that's occurring, character flaws that are there, little movements, little choices that over time add up to not a strong foundation, and at some point they can wreck you. For decades, Israel has been making these choices. It's not like they ever said, we don't worship Yahweh, we are no longer God. They never said that. But it's just that they turned their hearts, parts of their hearts, toward these other gods and these other concerns. They did the rituals at the tabernacle. They performed the sacrifices. They said the right words. They sang the right songs. But their choices were weakening them. Samuel sees this. He even saw this at the top levels, right, with Eli and the priests. And as Samuel notes, while they worshiped God, yes, they did not do it wholeheartedly. And they needed to get back to giving themselves entirely to God. They needed to offer not a part of their life, not this area or that area, but all areas to the lordship of their God. And we're told, thankfully, chapter 7, that they paid attention. That they listened to Samuel. They respected him. They paid attention. They started throwing their other gods out on the garbage heap. And that was their physical act of putting away these other gods. But we're also told there was a spiritual a revival going on as well as they began to confess their sins, as they began to cry out to God in prayer. So you saw very physical acts, but there were interior acts of repentance and revival happening as well. And when we start trusting, back to what's not good and the erosion that happens and the possibility of a spiritual sinkhole, if you will, when we start trusting other things, other people, other ideas, things other than our Creator, what you do, verse 4, is you got to call those out and you got to put them away. This is what I've been trusting in. I'm sorry, God. I'm not going to do that anymore. You call them out and you put them away. And Samuel, their leader, their judge, he can see this is all very genuine. I mean, the people want to come back to God. And so verses 5 to 7, he's leading this revival. And then Samuel said, everybody, assemble at Mizpah, and I will intercede with you, with the Lord, for you. When they had assembled at Mizpah, they drew water and they poured it out. They poured it out before the Lord. On that day they fasted, and there they confessed. Just try to imagine that. They're broken, they're mourning, they're lamenting, they're not eating, they're confessing sins to each other. We have sinned against the Lord. Samuel was the leader at Mizpah. So the people, they're together. They're in community for this revival. And Samuel prays and he intercedes before the Lord on their behalf. And then I like that, the symbolic pouring out of water. It's think of it sacrifice, a drink offering. Think of it as they're saying, this water represents me, and I'm just putting myself out before you. I'm holding nothing back. And so they do that, and they're fasting and they're confessing, and they've stopped pretending. Essentially, is what they've done. They've stopped imagining that they were special. And we think about that. Israel, the connection with God, the chosen people. But it was never that they were special. Okay? It was never that they were uniquely beautiful, uniquely wise, uniquely spiritual. It was that God had chosen them. They were special because God had decided, I'm going to love these people. And I'm going to show the world what it looks like to be in a relationship with me. And so they finally understand, look, our relationship with God is not based on our merits. And so they stop pretending and they start very publicly confessing to sins, naming sins and confessing and hauling out. I mean, the shame and the humiliation and the brokenness to walk out of your house carrying armloads of your idols. And then just put those on the garbage. And God wasn't the only one who took notice of this revival. The Philistines noticed as well. And as all of Israel seems to be absorbed in this, we would call it a revival, but some sort of religious festivities, it looked like a really good time to kind of sneak up there and catch them when they're not ready. And so the Philistines begin to move in and encircle Israel there at Mizpah. And then God gets involved. This is verses 7 to 9. Check out what happened. When the Philistines heard that Israel had assembled at Mizpah, the rulers of the Philistines came up to attack them. And when the Israelites heard of it, they were afraid because of the Philistines. I mean, they've lost couple of battles in a row to these guys. They said to Samuel, do not stop crying out to the Lord our God for us. Keep praying for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines. Then Samuel took a suckling lamb, offered it up as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord on Israel's behalf, and the Lord answered him. Now, really important, paying attention to what Israel, not only to what Israel did do, but also to what Israel did not do in this circumstance. They hear that the Philistines are encamped nearby and are preparing attacks against them. What they did not do, their first response was not arm themselves and rush out to attack. Their first response was not everybody run for the hills. Their first response was to cry out to God in prayer. I think we could agree that's a pretty good first response to a crisis situation. Samuel, don't stop praying for us. And I just think there's a humility here. Why are Samuel's prayers special or whatever? No, there's a humility. They know they've been entangled in sin and idolatry. They know Samuel has a special connection with the Lord. They know he has not been bowing down to Baals and Ashtoreths. So they're going to pray too, but they definitely want to make sure this guy is praying for them. So Samuel, don't stop praying for us. They seem to grasp that if they're going to be successful, it's not because they've got some military strategy figured out or some new battle formation or better weaponry this time around. No, if they're going to be successful, it's because God's going to step in and help them out. So Samuel prayed. He offers a sacrifice, asks for God's intervention, and God intervenes. And you can see how committed God's people are to prayer here, to seeking Him as a first line of defense, not as a last resort. And you can see that because even as, in the text, even as they are worshiping and praying and confessing, the Philistines begin to attack, begin to engage them in battle. So the Israelites, I'm just saying, they were really, really focused on God at this point. And it's time for God to flex His muscles, and when God flexes His muscles, look out. Verses 10 and 11. While Samuel, so their worship is going on, while Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to engage Israel in battle. But that day, the Lord thundered. Try to hear thunder right now, the kind that makes you jump in your chair because that was close. The Lord thundered with loud thunder against the Philistines. So this is an audible, thunderous response from the heavens. And He threw them into such a panic that they were routed before the Israelites. The men of Israel rushed out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, slaughtering them along the way to a point below Beth-kar. What a turnaround moment. They had sincerely given their hearts to God, their whole hearts to God, cried out in prayer, and clearly in the text, without them having to do very much, God gave them the victory. And their job was just kind of mop up, chase them down as they're running away. God had done the heavy lifting. And this audible, deafening thunder of the Lord, they knew that their prayers had been answered. No question. God heard our prayers. They started attacking us. All of a sudden, they're running the other direction. We haven't done anything. God is delivering us from them. So Israel recognized God's power. They recognized also, probably more importantly, their absolute need for God. And then this is important for stories yet to come in this book. They are esteeming Samuel even more, recognizing him. He's the leader. We need to turn to him. I mean, obviously God is their leader, but he is anointed by God to help lead us. Now, very soon they're going to be crying out for a king. We'll get to that soon enough. But they can see that Samuel is the one God has sent them to judge or to lead. Verse 12. Then Samuel, so they've been victorious. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far the Lord helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and did not invade Israelite territory again. Throughout Samuel's lifetime, the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines. The towns from Ekron to Gath, important Philistine towns, These towns that the Philistines had captured from Israel were restored to her. And Israel delivered the neighboring territory from the power of the Philistines, and there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Israel and these tribes that had been hounding them, or these people that had been hounding them. Samuel continued as judge over Israel all the days of his life. Now, from year to year, he went on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, judging Israel in all these places. Always went back to Ramah, that's his hometown, and there he also judged Israel. And he built an altar there to the Lord. So Ebenezer literally means stone of help. They set up this, it's a memorial is what it is. They set up this memorial there so that they would remember what happened, how they had cried out and repented and come back to God, and how God had heard their prayers, and how God had intervened and delivered them from their enemies. And I remember this hymn. You probably remember it too. We sang it this morning. O Thou Fount of Every Blessing by Robert Robinson. Wrote the lyrics back in 1758. And I remember this song growing up because it has that line, here I raise my Ebenezer. And as a kid, I had no idea what was going on. I mean, let's just put it this way. There were a lot of things in hymns, especially hymns written in the 17 and 1800s that I had a night with Eben Pinion, or I was at a loss. And this, I just figured had something to do with the Christmas Carol. I mean, Ebenezer Scrooge, I'd seen the movie a couple times. I could picture him, being grouchy and chewing out Bob Cratchit and stuff. And I was like, I don't know how Ebenezer found his way into the song, but he did, But it's this text. This is what it comes from, right? 1 Samuel chapter 7. Samuel lifts up this stone, and then they form this memorial there and calls it Ebenezer. Thus far the Lord has helped, the stone of help. Verse 12. Thus far the Lord has helped us. So the Ebenezer was a monument celebrating victory over the Philistines. And that old hymn, that phrase, here I raise my Ebenezer, is making that statement. Every time we sing that, it is saying, here and now, I recognize, I celebrate that God has brought me thus far, that He has helped me. He's blessed me, and I acknowledge I can't have victory in life. I can't have success. I can't face my enemies without the help of God. He's my stone of help. Here I raise my Ebenezer. So Samuel at the end of chapter 7, just I love the little wrap up there. He is doing a lot of judging, and it kind of shows you something about his heart for people. Everybody recognizes his role there. He could have just said, look, I live in Ramah. If you want some judging, if you want some advice, come on down and see me. My door's always open, right? And he did a fair amount of that in Ramah, but the text tells us that he also served the people by doing this circuit, around these towns, so that at least once a year he would be nearby, and if you had a dispute that needed to be resolved or some issue that you needed his help with, he would be around and he would offer counsel and solutions for you. As we close tonight, I just think part of this whole heart idea when it comes to our relationship with God, our worship to God, and it's just recognizing where every good and perfect gift comes from, and stopping down, lifting up your Ebenezer, and remembering things small or large, the victories that He's given you, the strength He's provided you for the struggle, and making sure that your heart is grateful to Him and that you are saying that to God. You're acknowledging that in a public sort of way. And that's what we do when we sing that hymn. So that's what we're going to do. That's how we're going to finish this time. John Scott's going to lead us in that hymn, and then we'll have a prayer here in in a few moments. But let's sing.